Okay, so, but like I said, when we were talking about perspective, but like I said, perspective is not the same thing as the point of view in which something is written, even if those things do work together. So here's my breakdown of that for you. First person point of view is when the character is the narrator is a character within the story. Okay. A good example of this is when we read that 9/11 story. The narrator was Jim, and Jim was the main character. He told us the whole story. So the whole story was told through Jim's point of view, which means that sometimes things might be unreliable or inaccurate because we were, as the audience, only given what Jim chose to give us, what Jim remembered, and what Jim could see. So we're limited in that way. However, this idea of a character within the story telling us the story from their point of view allows us to see the story through that character's eyes. It gives us access into how that character thinks. So the audience perspective of the story gets to be filtered through that character's perspective. And what's neat about that is sometimes you might know more about the world than the character does, which allows you to find suspense and humor in the decisions the narrator makes, even though you only know what the narrator thinks. I read a really awesome story once that was told from the point, it was a first person narrator, but it was told from the point of view of an imaginary friend of a boy with autism. And it was a really cool story for this because that imaginary friend had such a limited world view that you as the reader coming in knew way more about the world than the character did. And so when you're reading the character's thoughts and ideas, you find it suspenseful and you get anxious because you know the answers, but the character doesn't. So that's what's really cool about a first person point of view is it develops the audience perspective so that you only see that one character's perspective of the world. But then you get to add your own perspective to it. So you get those two worldviews come together, and that's where the magic happens. So the suspense and the humor is created entirely from what you know and what the character doesn't. And then sometimes it gets to be revealed from when you both don't know something, and the author's like, boom, here's something you didn't know. Okay, so we only know what they know most of the time. That brings us to our second point. I spent a lot of time on that slide. I apologize. Perspective is not point of view writing, third person limited. So in this particular case, the narrator is just a narrator. Think about that voice that speaks over a movie, okay, like Charlotte's Web. So the narrator tells the story from the characters this is not a character in the story. However, it focuses on just one character's vantage point. So it only gives me that one character's point of view. That means that I only know what that one character thinks and sees and feels. But because it's not the character telling me the story, I have to infer more about how the character sees things versus that internal monologue that tells me everything about the character. So this helps with perspective because the audience gets to watch the story from that one character, but we get more insight into the outside world. Since the narrator is more reliable, we get to know more about what's actually happening outside of the character, but we also get the inside of the character. So it's all the cool perspective stuff we get from first person, but with more idea about the outside world. All right. Perspective is not point of view writing, omniscient narrator. So this narrator knows everything. This author can enter the minds of the characters and describe what characters are thinking and feeling. So this means that you get to know everything about everyone with a reliable narrator. Okay, so in this particular case, if something is left out, it was definitely left out intentionally. And it's put there specifically to make you anxious, or specifically to draw suspense, or for you to see the irony in a situation because one character knows something that another character doesn't. So the author gets to have more fun with the different perspectives in this because you know everyone's perspective, or you can at least infer everyone's perspective, and then you get to go from there. So our last one, perspective is not point of view writing. It's not the same. However, they do work together. So for this one, you have the objective narrator. So this person does not enter the character's mind. It's objective as in they only sees what the character's doing. Think like Eye in the Sky, Big Brother, like we're only hidden camera television shows. We only get to see what they're doing and what they're saying. We don't get any insight. So this is, you as a reader get a very limited perspective into the world of the characters and how the characters think. So that means that you have to do more inferring about how the characters feel. So this is where characterization takes a huge chunk of your time, because you have to think about what if I act this way, how do the, if the characters act this way, how does the character feel? And you have to infer. But what's cool about that is that gives us more of that movie vibe, because a lot of times in movies you don't know what characters are thinking. You have to infer it. So a lot of times from the way you get to see things, there gets to be more suspense and more humor, because it's more like you're watching it unfold versus something's coming. So you get to play around with it a little bit more. I hope this was helpful. So my big takeaway from this is, remember, when someone asks you about perspective in a question, it is not, all right, so as I was saying, remember, when you see this in a test, when they say point of view, they're not going to ask you about first, third, objective, omniscient. They're not going to ask you about that, but they are going to ask you about perspective point of view. So they're going to want to know, how does the character see the world? How does the character feel about the world? How does the author feel about the world? How does the author want you to feel about the world? And so knowing how something is written can sometimes help you get a better understanding of what the author wants you to see, okay? So just be mindful of that. I know that this was a long video, but there was a lot to cover in this. So our next video will be a little bit shorter.